The Honourable Chris Finlayson.
Mr Speaker, I want to begin by acknowledging your outstanding period of service to the state and wish you all the very best for the future. I want also to apologise to you, sir, that from time to time you ask for my assistance in getting Paula Bennett to zip it, sweetie, and I failed because she's very hard to handle. Unlike Mr Robertson and Mayor Annette King, I'm an authentic Wellingtonian, and I want to welcome all my colleagues back to this beautiful city, which is enjoying one of its trademark summers. And for those members who come into Parliament by going around the bays, can I say to them, I think it would be very wise if they came through the Mount Victoria Tunnel and past the Basin Reserve. And of course the Basin Reserve is one of our most famous cricket grounds. I was there in 1978 when we beat the English for the first time, and I certainly hope we'll be able to perform well against Alistair Cook's magnificent team, which I think arrived in the country just last night. And then one goes round the Basin Reserve, and what does one see? Well, I say to Mr Robertson, one sees Mr Brownlee's magnificent new road. And that is going to be Jerry Brownlee. Jerry Brownlee has made a tremendous contribution to the rebuilding of Christchurch, and he's done a wonderful job in ensuring that that road is going to be constructed in time for the centennial of the First World War. And I'm very pleased at the progress on our motorway, and I frankly can't believe that Helen Clark was prepared to put a motorway right through our park and past the playground of a primary school, because that's exactly what she was going to do, but she never liked children. I could criticise the Labour opposition for that and other things, but I'm intending to be positive. And first I want to focus on my colleagues in caucus, because it's my last day as the Acting Minister of Labour, and I want to acknowledge the contribution of that fine member for Waimakariri who tipped Clayton Cosgrove out, Kate Wilkinson, whose work on health and safety, and particularly setting up the independent task force, is going to lead to some important reforms. And I'm sure that Simon Bridges is going to do a very good work. I have to tell you, Mr Speaker, that work is already well underway to implement the 16 recommendations of the Royal Commission's report on Pike River, and I think the work product, which I've said in this House will be in place by the end of 2013, will be very good indeed. And I also acknowledge my good friend Tim Grosser and express my support for his campaign to become Director General of the World Trade Organization. His success is going to be very important for international trade, but it's also sorely needed to prove that there are indeed New Zealand politicians who are up to the job of running large international organisations. Now, I could criticise the Labour Party's lacklustre start to the year, but frankly that's boring, and I'm not really interested in the Labour Party. I'm interested in the government, and frankly they're hopeless, Mr Speaker. I could comment about Labour's scheduling David Shearer's State of the Nation speech on the same day as Materia Touré's State of the Planet speech, the first clash of many to come, because in reality, as can be seen around the world, social democratic parties hate green parties. In reality, I have to say that David Shearer's speech was not so much a State of the Nation speech as a State of the Planet speech, because he borrowed catchphrases and words from Labour leaders and social democratic leaders all around the country. So take, for example, some of the statements that Ed Miliband made to the Fabian Society. Basically, David Shearer borrowed all of those. He did what could be called a Joe Biden, who wrecked his presidential campaign in 1988 by unbelievably borrowing Neil Kinnock's phrases. I mean, that's a sign of desperation if ever there was desperation. But there we have little Ed Miliband's favourite phrases being appropriated by David Shearer. And I say to Mr Robertson that if the Labour Party cares so much about New Zealand jobs, why doesn't David Shearer hire a New Zealand speechwriter? I could talk about Labour's proposed reshuffle, but what's there to talk about? I have to say that the depth of talent is such in the National Party that our great Prime Minister rejuvenated the Cabinet with members from National's strong caucus. But I wonder what talent is David Shearer going to be able to find in the murky recesses of the Labour Party? It's kind of like looking for the Loch Ness Monster in the Thorndon Pool. The Thorndon Pool is very shallow, and what you think is Nessie is in fact a branch or a log. And I'm sure poor old David Shearer is going to come back from all his hard work and find that all that there is Rajan Prasad. And so contrast that with the attitude on this side of the House, how fortunate we are to have one another, because we're not only fine colleagues, but we're good friends, united behind a great leader. But the only person the Labour Party can unite over is Charles Chauvel, because they all hate him. Mr. Speaker, I've had a very busy work program planned for this year, but one of the jobs I would... Mr. what's his name? That fellow from Rumataka, Hipkins, is laughing. Mr. Speaker, I have a very busy program this year, but one of the things I want to talk about is... I'll laugh when that member stands for the mayoralty. And that'll be a great fight. As Associate Minister of Maori Affairs, one of the issues that I've been very interested in focusing on is in reforming Te Ture Whenua Act, the Maori Land Act. And I want to say something about this issue that's not often talked about in this place, but it's very, very important, because about 5% of the nation's landmass is in fact covered by this legislation, about 27,000 blocks of Maori land comprising about 1.42 million hectares. And if you look at it in the context of the North Island, then it climbs to about 10 to 11%. And a reform, which is long overdue, is going to provide great opportunities. And we all know the power or the potential of agribusiness to grow this country's wealth. Maori agribusiness accounts for about 8 to 10% of milk solids already. And there are any number of reports that have been done over the years, and Dr. Sharples will attest to this. Opportunities are there to grow Maori agribusiness, but the unfortunate thing is, because of this legislation, 80% of Maori land is either undeveloped or underperforming, and it's an issue that's been around for a long time and simply needs to be addressed. Major structural issues stemming from the 1993 legislation and compliance costs created by the legislation. Now, that legislation was last reviewed in 2002, and despite the same problems being identified, the vast majority of them have not been implemented, and I'm going to be working on that with Dr. Sharples this year, and I'm very much looking forward to it. We've got a very busy year, as the Prime Minister said, on treaty settlements, and I want to acknowledge all members of the House for their contribution last year that meant that 12 settlement bills were passed. And the week before Christmas, I signed 5 deeds of settlement and 3 very important agreements in principle with Ngāruahine, Taranaki and Te Atiawa, and I'm looking forward to bringing them to deeds of settlement this year and to continuing to work with my Maori Party colleagues on this hugely important work of providing long overdue justice to iwi around the country, and also our success in the arts, because there is a lot going on there, but I particularly want to mention World War I commemorations. A lot of work, as I said, is being done on the Jerry Brownlee Park. That will be the centrepiece, but a huge amount of work is also being done both here and overseas in terms of commemorations. And I had a very interesting meeting in Paris with the French Minister of Veterans Affairs, who's very keen to see New Zealand do its bit in Europe. Mr. Speaker, so much to do, so much to be positive about with this group of outstanding New Zealanders led by such a fine Prime Minister. Lots of work to do, and I can't wait to get stuck in this year.
The Honourable Annette King.